Welcome back. You're watching Morning Prime. In case you're just joining us, good morning from wherever you're tuning in from. We continue with the show, The Deliberations, right here, even as we reflect on what's fresh off the press, taking a look at today's edition of The Dailies. We've interrogated some of the stories that have been highlighted. Allow me to reintroduce my panelists. For those of you who are just joining us right now, I'm joined by Dr. Barak Muluka, who's a political scientist. Asante for your time. Dr. Gashui Kariuki, who's a public health specialist, and equally joined by Jim India, who's the head of policy research and learning at the Emerging Leaders Foundation. Before the break, gentlemen, we definitely talked about matters to do with varsity education and the signs of changes that are happening. But let's shift focus right now to another top story that has featured prominently on today's dailies, all to do with that particular letter from the AU on February 19th from the chairperson, Musa Faki, all to do with Raila's exit as envoy as the AU High Representative for Infrastructure and Development role. According to Raila, he asked to exit this particular position due to the challenges, availability challenges, and on the flip side, the AU seems to have let him go 8 months shy out of his contract. And as my director perhaps can assist us with this, there's a editorial cartoon on the Daily Nation that perhaps puts it in a comical way, bringing satire into it. If we could see it on our screens right now, it's all to do with Raila Odinga and what I've just mentioned right now. If we could kindly see it on the screens. Okay, there we go. Gentlemen, at least we can indulge and get to discuss about this, because as you can see, one of the eggs rather, that Raila is juggling happens to have dropped down. Allow me to zoom in so we can definitely see what's going on there. One of them, the AU post, is cracked, unfortunately, but he's still juggling 3 issues: mass action, Azimio allies, and the ODM rebels. And as you can see, he's definitely walking on a tightrope. So this is no mean task, no mean feat. But this is a gentleman who has been described as the enigma in Kenyan politics. So, gentlemen, Barak Muluka, well, what do you make of this editorial cartoon and the question of whether he was, pushed out or did he quit? Is it neither here nor there?
See, the position that Mr. Odinga has been holding within the AU was essentially an outcome of a political process back at home. That as part of the appeasement that President Uhuru Kenyatta extended towards Mr. Odinga was finding a place for him within the African Union circuit. And I don't know whether this is true or not. Earlier on, I talked about allegations. And so I speak on caution that, in fact, the Kenya government was paying Mr. Odinga through the African Union. Okay?
You're not sure about that?
I'm not sure about it, but I have very good cause to believe that that is indeed the case. In fact, I think it needs to be pursued, particularly by you journalists, to establish the total veracity of that. And then you get to a point where there's a new sheriff in town, and you know where Mr. Odinga is with that new sheriff in town. And that can tell you what is happening about this negotiated position, that it was negotiated as a part of the appeasement is not in doubt. Okay? Then you have Mr. Odinga giving the president a 14-day ultimatum to say that he's going to return the country to disorder, because these things that he's talking about of mass action are basically taking the country into a context of disorder. Now, the African Union itself, before we even talk about the position of the country and its remittances, and certainly this country makes remittances to the African Union. And it would be part of that anyway, that Mr. Odinga was getting paid, whether there was something supernumerary that was then going to him or not. It now starts becoming neither here nor there. But within the AU context itself, you cannot go around the place intimidating the government of the day that has been constitutionally elected and constitutionally validated by the highest court in the land on the basis of some moonshine kind of revelations, so-called, by an invisible whistleblower whose name is not even known, who has no face, no body. And you are going out to destabilize the country on the basis of that. They will not keep you there because they don't want to encourage insurgents in their own spaces, because you start moving towards the domain of insurgency. This is no longer opposition. This is about making the country unworkable. It's about destabilizing the environment so that the person in power ostensibly gets to a position where they say, now my regime is no longer tenable. Okay. As he has been saying, I must go. And worst of all, he says, we are going to take power. What is to take power? It is to overthrow the established constitutional order. And the AU is not going to carry along with you.
And just briefly, before we cross over to other guests, what do you make of a vibrant opposition? What would you term as a vibrant opposition? One that holds the government to account, but how should it? Because they're agitating for mass action in order to push the current administration to lower the cost of living, reintroduce subsidies, we've heard of that, apart from opening the service. So how would you term a vibrant opposition? Because this is what the current administration asked for.
A vibrant opposition begins by recognizing the constitutional order, that there is a president or a prime minister or whoever that foremost head of government may be, that there is a government that is legitimate. And this government has been validated by the constitutional order in the country. When you say that we do not recognize this government, and you say that this government must go, you are saying we don't recognize Ruto and all his appointees. You are no longer the opposition. You are insurgents. Your agenda is no longer to reform the environment in which that government is functioning. Your agenda is to overthrow the government through illegal means. When Mr. Odinga says that the people are going to take back the power, what is he saying? He's basically saying that we are going to use extra-legal, in fact, illegal mechanisms outside the Constitution. And he's hanging onto the article of the Constitution that says that all sovereign power belongs to the people, and the people may exercise it either directly or through their elected representatives. So he's saying the people are going to take back the power. He's saying, basically, that when we start mass action, we are going to march to State House, and we are going to flush out Ruto, and me, Raila Odinga, as the self-styled people's president, I will take over because our election was stolen. That is not an opposition. Those are subversives. Those are insurgents. And what we are seeing is verbal insurgency before it morphs into armed and stable insurgency.
So how should they raise issues? when it comes to the cost of living? And
First
this is a question I
recognize
will...
that there is a government and that you don't agree with the policies of this government.
And provide an alternative.
And place there an alternative. Have even your own shadow government. Yeah? It may or may not be paid for, but have there your own shadow entities. You have members of parliament who will go to the various chambers to take positions that are divergent from your position, from the government's position.
Okay.
Use all public spaces and platforms to show why the government is wrong. Oppose things like this phase. Oppose things like what has happened at KRA. Come out and say why you think it is not the right thing to be done.
Okay.
Oppose government policies and activities and put there, suggest your alternatives. But you do not say that we are going to paralyze the country. That is not an opposition.
Fair enough. And luckily we have young gentlemen on the show. And perhaps, you know, with the nature of such events, the masses mostly encompass young men and women just like us. What do you make of a call to mass action, even as you perhaps react to what Daktari has mentioned and the editorial cartoon as well, briefly?
So I don't think mass action is extra constitutional. I think it is a means and it is an alternative that is provided for within the Constitution.
The right to picket.
The right to picket. In fact, you know, government should provide security to anyone who wants to picket. So I think that is, we should not stop anyone who wants to picket. If Raila Odinga wants to picket, by all means, let him have the time of his life and picket as he so wishes. The challenge that I have with that tactic is that he moves away from being an opposition, as Barack points out. You have parliamentarians, both in both houses. You have members of county assembly across all 47 counties. You have the opportunity to actually sit down and say, if there was a policy issue that resulted, or a systemic issue that resulted in the alleged stolen elections, how do we ensure that this does not happen again in 2027? And we've seen this with him. In 2017, there was an issue with the election, and he said all manner of things, went to court, it was stopped. He had 5 years and did absolutely nothing with regards to the stolen elections. There was no bill, there was no policy recommendation, attempts to reform the IBC, attempts to reform the system to ensure that we do not get back to where we were in 2017. And so that is why this looks like a really, really selfish agenda. This looks like something that is self-serving to an individual and not necessarily the whole population. He's lost his job at the AU. I think it's neither here nor there, to be honest, because the AU has said there's now going to be a body that's going to take care of whatever he was taking care of. The rest of us, I don't know why this is making frontline news. We have more serious and pressing matters as a country to be really concerned about. So what do we do if he has lost his job? He still makes millions of shillings from pensions as a former prime minister. His businesses are still flourishing. So what does it concern the rest of us that he does not have a job at the AU? Why is that news that the rest of us are talking about?
Interesting. Perhaps the timeliness of it. Daktari, what do you make of this whole debacle?
Well, first off, I do think that the timeliness of it is a bit suspicious. One, as my learned friend here had put forward, it was a political appointment, and the political goodwill that came with it has since been lost. And it is somewhat at the prerogative of the person who gives these political appointments to take it back, should that have been the case in this scenario. And then secondly, when we talk about the call for mass action, I take issue with it not because of the call for mass action is wrong in itself. No, there is need for things to change, and clearly the following do say, and he has quite a huge following that see that there is cause for change. The unfortunate thing is that historically, as my friend had put it, he has not proven to be a person who stands with his position. He doesn't have the conviction, he doesn't have the courage of his convictions. Because once he gets what he wants, historically, he no longer fights for that thing that he said he came out to fight for. Which is, yes, both selfish, and secondly, it does play a huge number on the ability of us having a proper opposition. He, unlike Daktari's position where he is not opposition, surely opposition does not necessarily always have to agree with the fact that there is a government. That is not a necessity of it. If they do not disagree that there is a government, that's part of them being the opposition. It's fair play if they disagree with it.
But what government are you opposing?
Yeah, there's no government. So who are you opposing?
That's a good question, because the idea of you saying that a government, an illegal government, cannot be opposed is just basically saying that there is no function that is beyond the illegality of an election. Like if you're put there illegally, are we supposed to not have an opposition to that decision?
You see, this government did not arrive using the barrel of the gun. This is not Liberia, where Samuel Doe bursts into State House or the executive mansion, flashes out the president, kills him, and takes over and calls himself the president. That is an illegal government. We are talking about a democratically elected government. You have been part of the process. You have gone through it, and I agree with Jim here. Jesse, I was on your shows many times over the past 5 years in these studios here on Mombasa Road.
Yeah.
And you will bear me out, and the discerning viewers will bear me out, that I kept saying, Mr. Odinga is not addressing the salient issues about the IBC. I kept saying this BBI thing has sidestepped the important issues. If the election in 2017 was stolen, then the IBC's reform should be foremost. And I'm not seeing it in these things which they are talking about in BBI. They are talking about an expanded executive. They are talking about redistribution of power. They're not talking about the things that matter.
Okay.
So here is a gentleman, I want to believe he's one, who has subjected himself to the electoral process up to the very final end. And the results have been declared. Someone else has won. Ordinarily, if you are convinced that this person has won, you say, okay, fine, you have won. We will be the opposition. But if you believe that they have not won, you go through the petition process, and which is what happened. And the law is very clear that what the Supreme Court determines will be final. The Supreme Court comes out with its determination, and you are the one who has filed the petition. They finish, and at the end of it, you start calling the judges names. You start telling them that they are rogues. You start saying that you don't recognize the government. That is not opposition, particularly when you are saying that in the coming few days, there's going to be a revolution. You are not recognizing the legitimacy of that government. And what you are doing, therefore, is insurgency, that you now want to mobilize the populations. And they have said it. These are their own words. Okay. That people are going to take back their power. What you are looking for is not keeping the government on its toes so that it does the right things for the good of the country. What you are saying is that you want to mobilize people to violently take over power. Now, that is not opposition.
Let's look at the issues that were raised since this has come up, and they're quite key on cost of living. They mentioned that, in that 14-day ultimatum that Barack has mentioned, the cost of living should come down. Reintroduction of some of the subsidies that we saw removed once the Ruto administration came to power. And apart from that, the opening of the IEBC servers. And just yesterday we had from the president mentioning, the servers were open at the time of the election, the time of the Supreme Court petition. What's so wrong? They were open at a point. You didn't make a fuss over it. So apart from the politics of it, when it comes to the issues that they're articulating, does it make sense? Do you think the cost of living will go down once a reemergence of some of the subsidies comes, despite how much it was costing the government?
In fact, the cost of living is going to go high if you go to mass action, because you make investing in this economy a lot more difficult. And you destabilize the Kenya shilling even further. Destabilizing the Kenya shilling further, it means it costs us more to import goods into this country. It means that the cost of items becomes a lot more expensive. And to say within 14 days the cost of living needs to come down is nothing short. We know that the president has been called Nabi, but it is nothing short of asking for a miracle from Nabi himself, because 14 days, surely, that would not happen. But look at the other things that he's talking about, reintroduction of subsidies. All that he needed to do was to look at the supplementary budget which was presented to Parliament the other day, and you will see that part of what this government is suggesting is the reintroduction of subsidy on maize and a bit of the fuel subsidy. They're not doing it at the scale in which the last regime was doing it, but it is in the supplementary budget and it's going through the parliamentary process, and ultimately that's going to happen. He's talking about I think every issue that team led by Raila Odinga has raised, there's only one issue in my opinion that is of most concern to them, and that is the constitution of the IEBC. Everything else is a smokescreen in my opinion. The tenure of this IEBC has come to an end, or this commission is coming to an end. A new commission is going to be constituted, and I think that just like in 2013 when the Isaac Hassan commission was being kicked out, and CORD then ensured that there was the formation of a team that brought together the opposition and government, and that's how we ended up with the Chebukati Commission. I think they're trying to push this government to the same corner to ensure that they have a stake in the constitution of a new commission, because I think we have seen, or they think that if you don't take part in constituting a new commission, you could as well count it lost in 2027. Because he who counts the votes, unfortunately, is that commission. And they have the final say on, they make the declaration on Form 34C.
But Kenyans have the final say.
Kenyans vote, anyway. But the chairman declares.
This is interesting. And we've heard from some of the parliamentarians mentioning that the laws that will be used to, bring these commissioners to office were actually changed while...
by Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. That this was their law.
And
the thinking at that time was that Mr. Raila Odinga was going to become the president. And the contradictions in this country are that at that time, President William Ruto today was the one who was opposed to that arrangement. So Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta thought that they would have in place a legal dispensation that would allow them to deal with the IBC in a manner that would be favorable to them. But they forgot one thing that William Ruto told them at the Bomas of Kenya on the 28th day of November 2019. When he was telling them, look, let us wait a bit. When he was saying some of us are a little slow, we in science are a little slow, so explain these things to me a little more, because the day comes when the boot is on the other foot.
Indeed.
And then you're going to start regret. And now the boot is actually on the other foot. And the people who put there this law are now saying they're going to mobilize for mass action if this law is followed. It is a reflection of what Jim here calls insincerity, that you thought you'd put it there to suit you. Then you didn't get there, somebody else got there. Now you want to destabilize the whole country because of a law which you made yourself?
And but just to agree with you, that for me is part of the... I've always said that Parliament is our weakest line of defense in this democracy. Because these laws, you might say Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga, they were passed in Parliament. And our Parliament has constantly been passing laws that are serving individuals, a party leader, a president, an opposition leader, and they get us into this fix. And so if Parliament doesn't change that, then even in this Parliament, they will continue passing laws that favor William Ruto or favor whoever. And in the next government, we realize, unfortunately, the laws were short-lived. We were short-sighted. As Barack said, we were not thinking 200 years, we were thinking 2027. And then we get to 2027 and realize that the person we thought would be president will not be president. So there's a sense in which there needs to be longevity in how we think about how we pass policies and how we do legislation. But Parliament needs to do a better job. Otherwise, they're our weakest line of defense in this democracy.
But you know how it works. The majority has their way, the minority has their say. So when it comes to numbers, Parliament plays with numbers. It's quite important right there. But gentlemen, since we're talking about Parliament, something that happened this week sort of stood out. And I don't mean to jibe a fella called Eric Omondi, but he sort of tried to, agitate for a lower cost of living. He's a comedian by profession, and I'm not writing out any comedian because, look at Ukraine, who's leading that country, So what do you make of the conversation on the cost of living right now? Apart from the politics that is going on around it, Kenyans are definitely struggling as it is. We have statutory deductions that are going up. It will be perhaps a burden to the employer and the employee, even as we inculcate a culture of saving in the society. The taxes has been an issue. The cost of electricity is definitely set to go up roughly 70%. So in terms of working towards lowering the cost of living, how best should we approach it from where you sit?
Thank you. That's a very important question. And actually, I think that should have been the focus of both questions, this one and the last one, because the issues here that are being raised, aside from the politics, we should have elevated that conversation to stop talking about the political aspect of it, but demand something more of these people who are saying to be our leaders, be they the self-appointed or the movement of the opposition. The conversation should be forcing them to actually change the dialogue to be about these issues. Telling them that you see, you're complaining about the sharing of the cake, that the Mwananchi is not getting an equal piece of the cake. But that's actually what should be the discourse. The main complaint about this current opposition is that they didn't get a bigger share of it. Not how it's being shared, they just wanted a bigger share of it, which is wrong. And I could laud the efforts of the comedian as much as people might look at it as not the best direction or as a way of him getting publicity. But he did bring out something. It was somewhat of a way of highlighting something that are very wrong in this country. That conversation about people dying in less than 100-kilometer radius from hunger, from the capital city, because of hunger, should be the first thing that we hear every day, and how we are fixing that. It should be that we are trying to find out how we are going to make it sustainable going forward, despite the errors that have been made, because for a 60-year-old democracy and a country that has been making the strides in the economy that we have been making, we should not be talking about people dying of hunger in this country. We produce and waste. The FAO actually came up with statistics that say that during the height of our production, when we are marketing most of our products, close to 50% of our food goes to waste. That is something that can be stored, and that it can be. You cannot tell me it is impossible for us to have people who are coming up with ideas of putting an end to this. That should be the level of discourse. It should be that we have elevated it and forced these people to discuss the issues of the raising level of cost of living. Those are the conversations that we want them to talk about. but not mark them, despite how, not use them as a vehicle of pushing their own personal agendas. So yes, I do laud the efforts of his efforts to showcase this, and I really hope that it was an eye-opener for everyone to understand that politics is everything that we live. We live by politics, right? It's the air we breathe, it's the water we drink, it's the food that we eat, and it should be everyone's concern. It's not supposed to be left to the political, or to the elite, or the people who we delegate our thinking to every 5 years because we choose to take the easy way out than ask the tough questions. So yes, everybody should be out on the streets and asking, where are we going? But that should be the question, not about how much am I going to get out of it.
Interesting. Barack Muluka, cost of living. Even as we take a look at the changes happening in KRA, you know, we definitely have the government that is centered on collecting and, you know, using those collections rather to fund our government, apart from borrowing, which they're trying to avoid. What do you make of the conversation around the cost of living? Are we approaching it in the right way, taking a look at various policy issues that need to be changed, or the politics at the end of the day is drowning all other parts of this conversation?
Yeah, once again, I do not consider myself to be an expert in political economy. Yeah, but as a citizen and as a journalist, I think I can make some comments on that.
Kindly do.
In a limited sense or context. First, Eric Omondi. Every citizen has a right to express themselves on the state of things in the country. And I think that Eric Omondi, as a dramatist, as a comedian, is only dramatizing our predicament. And to whisk him away does not seem to be right to me, unless the persons doing that understand why they are doing so. I watched the clip of the whole saga, what he was doing with his fellow dramatist, how he was apprehended, and eventually how he was driven away. At some point, I couldn't help wondering whether it was some kind of choreography. How come it was so meticulous, so orderly? I thought I would see a few of those erratic pictures and moments that would show the commotion in the whole process. But even if it comes through as choreography, it is still valid in the sense that the dramatist must have his or her role, the thespian must have his or her own role, the commentator, the writers of editorials in papers like these ones should have their place and their role. And you are not going to come and arrest us because we have written an editorial on the cost of living in the country, or that we have had that conversation on national television. Those are the free spaces that people should use to ventilate some of these issues and the tensions and emotions that go with them. So the conversation must go on. It is a valid conversation. Noting also as a rider that now the cost of living is a challenge not just in this country, but everywhere else in the world. However, we have got to address our own situation, because what they are eating in Uganda or in Tasmania is their matter. Eventually, my stomach is here, and we must look at the cost of living in our own context. It's a valid conversation, and it must go on from those who are in government and those who are outside.
Interesting. And I'm looking at one of the pages right here on The Star, and it's on the front page, right there at the top, all to do with banditry, battered economy, drought. That's the president's delicate balancing act as it is. Some of the challenges that have emerged even as he goes into, is it his 6 months in office, thereabout. So looking at all these issues, and perhaps you could start your point with what has been mentioned, because you come from the Emerging Leaders Foundation. How would you imagine your president, your deputy president, symbols of national unity, to talk, especially on political podiums? Because that's been one of the conversations going on this week about the utterances that have been made. Recently this week we had the DP mention, you know, are you guys shareholders, by the way? I hope so. You know, and then later on he came back, I think yesterday, with a jibe at mainstream media and social media that perhaps we are being funded by unknown people, milk cartel and whatnot. How do you envision a person holding such a position to address the masses?
Unfortunately, I mean, the Constitution prescribes how the presidency, and that would include, you know, the president, the deputy president, and members of their cabinet, including those who have told us that human beings are commodities that we can sell the way we want. It prescribes on how they should conduct their conduct in public. And it sort of, while we cannot censor people, right? We cannot limit their freedom of speech and tell them to say or not to say. But there are some things that politicians say on pulpits that are meant to be political. And because we must not forget that at the end of the day, they're politicians. They go through into office through a political means. They maintain their staying in office through very political means. The context in which he was speaking, where he was speaking, who he was speaking to and with, matters a lot in determining how they should speak. And so, but the tone should always be one of unity and bringing people together. There should always be a unifying tone to whatever they say, because they are a symbol of national unity. And in the face of everything that we are facing, in the face of drought, in the face of banditry, and the high cost of living, you do not want it to appear as if there's a side of this country that is feeling, because nobody is, whether you're a shareholder or not, whether you voted for this,
or not,
whether you voted for the president or for the opposition leader, you are facing the same problems at the end of the day. No one is receiving 6,000 and the others are not receiving. We are all in this mess together, whether you like it or not. We are all in this mess together. The only difference is one of us voted for whoever is in power and the other one did not vote for them. And so their utterances need to be one. I wouldn't say we're a fractured nation per se, but there needs to be one in which seals any cracks that they emerge, because we need a united front. Right now, this government needs the opposition members of parliament in their troops to sit in parliament and legislate properly on how do we deal. Sending Kindiki to go and stay in the north is not a very effective, security strategy in itself. What is the legislative, how can parliament assist in this? That can only happen when there's robust conversation in parliament. That can only happen when at the county levels, the members of county assembly are pursuing an agenda which is critical. Right now, there's the County Integrated Development Plan, the CIDP, which is being passed across all the different counties. This is a 5-year plan for all counties. You need concerted efforts. The government says in the next 5 years, this is our plan, and how does it sift down to the different sub-national governments? So, Jesse, all I would say is, perhaps being new in office, the deputy president might be getting the hang of their office. We all have probation. When we get into a new job, you're given 3 months probation to figure out the job. Sometimes you're excited and whatnot. And he's never been deputy president before. William Ruto has never been president before. So I would extend some bit of probation to them to figure out how do you rise to the occasion to actually live up to those standards. But I think whoever is advising them ultimately has that difficult job of saying you need to tone down or you need to speak this way or that way.
And Dr. Ari, as I cross over to you, is he saying, there's the reality and then there's the ideal scenario? When the deputy president mentions that serikali, watu wa UDA, kwanza, those who supported us will be included first and then nyinyi tutaona baadaye. Is this a reality that is being mentioned by a straight-talking deputy president that is rubbing people the wrong way because we we want an ideal scenario where government is formed equally, opposition come, those who supported us come, we form this government, from where you say?
I would actually laud him for saying what he said, because he called a spade a spade. It's what we're seeing. Let's not try and the idea of giving him a probation period so that he can clean up his words is wrong. Let him speak what he means, because that's what he actually means. We have seen it publicly, the way they're actually ostracizing some of the people that they consider not friendlies. Just for example, and I'm not saying that is actually what happened, but you have seen it in the KRA, who they think that they're not friendly, they kind of get the boot and they bring in their own people. So saying that you think that he requires some time to have thought through his words, no, he meant what he's saying. Yeah. And it wasn't something that he just said the first time, you know. Even from before, they've repeatedly said this: if you're not on this side of the divide, you're out. And yeah, and when he actually use the analogy of us being people being commodities and us going back to the pre-colonial period where there was the imperial British companies and so on. He meant it. It wasn't a slide of the tongue, because those words were not said in a vacuum. It wasn't something that he woke up and just conjured from thin air. No. It's the practicality of what is happening. He meant it.
Okay, and finally, before we cross over to Daktari, appointments should have the face of Kenya. And I know I brought this up earlier. Do you think, so far, how have we performed in terms of the appointments? When you talk about some of the shortlisted individuals for positions of EACC, when you come to the CAS position, and those who have been appointed so far, does it reflect the face of Kenya from where you sit? Earlier on, you talked about meritocracy vis-a-vis rewarding loyalty, but in terms of the face of Kenya, yeah.
That's a two-side. That's a sword with two sides, because one, it reflects the face of the people in the sense of our politics. Like, we agree and accept that this is the way we are. Meritocracy is something that we are okay with. But in actual sense, if we were to look at it demographically or otherwise, we actually don't see that to be the case, because if you are talking, as Dr. Barak had quite clearly put it, we have a majority of the population being the youth. Yet we are calling it a democracy, and how many people, one position is the only one that we can fight for. I mean, it does not reflect what the population, the people are. It doesn't.
Okay, interesting. Daktari, kindly give us your take. Inclusivity, have we ticked that box?
You know, Daktari is very right that you've got to look at all those demographics. You have got to look at the youth, you have got to look at the disabled, you have got to look at the women, you have got to look at the older citizens like myself, yeah? Yes. And even much older ones like my parents who are in their 90s, and to see that we are all being included. We are adaptable. You've got to look at the communities that we come from in terms of language and linguistics, and you have got to look at even the possibility that there are religions, religious communities. So there are many different things that you have got to take into account. That said, I don't know where the deputy president was really coming from, what has pushed him into that space of that kind of hyperbole. I take it as hyperbole, even when His Excellency the President says that Kindiki should camp in Pokot. Yeah? I don't think he means that Kindiki, the person, should literally camp in Pokot, hyperbole. I think Kindiki represents the Ministry of Interior, represents that aspect of home security. Yeah. And home security should focus there. I hope we are all right. There's a dean.
Apologies for that. We're getting it sorted, yeah.
Yeah, so there's that hyperbole. But government, throughout history, time and space, is always formed by those who have won the election, because they have positioned a certain agenda and they are purposing to implement that agenda when they get into power. Now, you, having been in a different stream, I would expect that for starters, you didn't even agree with the agenda that I was placing on the table. That when I was talking about the wheelbarrow and I was talking about the bottom-up agenda, you thought that it was all rubbish, it was all nonsense. Now, when I get into power and I start appointing people who believe in the wheelbarrow, who believe in the bottom-up agenda, you cannot say that you also want to be part of that bandwagon. You stay in an alternative position and you keep on criticizing what I'm doing with my bottom-up, what I'm doing with my wheelbarrow, and showing the country why your alternative agenda would have been better in that situation. And therefore, you position yourself as government in waiting, and the day that you get into office, you remove my people. In fact, some of these people who are going now, they should have been removed a long time ago. President Ruto has taken too long before removing the agents of the ancient regime and putting there his own people. And he doesn't have to be apologetic about it, provided that he's doing it within the coordinates of what the Constitution says, that it doesn't get too lopsided, maybe too many people from Emmanuel and fewer people from elsewhere. And there's absolutely no way, I think, that even as you do that, you can be told that, oh, these people are not look for competent people within your own corner, because they must be there.
Then why
even the loyal ones?
Okay, then why eat into the opposition, if I may ask? Because we've seen the president quite enthusiastic about, welcoming the members of parliament from the opposition into his fold.
Just that I can explain.
Briefly.
You see, if I'm the president, Barack, and you, Jesse, in the opposition, or in the insurgency, and I beat you in the election, and you start saying that Barack must go, as an intelligent person, I must ask myself, if Jesse were to remove me, how would he go about it? And I would say he would probably want to move a motion of no confidence in parliament. And so the first thing I do is to secure that space. And I secure that space by growing my numbers in parliament. I'm not going to...
But that's a double-edged sword.
I'm not just going to...
when he talks about parliament as an institution failing when it comes to its mandate.
Absolutely. The quality of parliament can be interrogated. But as the president, I'm not going just to sit there and wait for you to come and move a motion of no confidence in me. I start preparing in advance. You have forewarned me. And they say to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So you have told me that Muluka must go. Nitaangalia hiyo ya bunge kwanza. Niangalie kwamba huyu daktari kuna vile ananinyemelea. And so I secure myself.
Okay. Anyway, gentlemen, our time is up. I want the final comments as we conclude today's deliberations.
I think
just a minute.
Let them do it. I've spoken too much.
You've
I've
concluded.
finished.
Asante sana. Kindly, the floor is yours.
I think one of the things that we must appreciate with Katiba is that the utterances of any leader, whether the president or deputy president, ultimately do not override the provisions of the Constitution. In an event that we did not have the devolved system of government, and that Parliament was not going to look at the division of revenue, and that every county, whether or not you voted for the government of the day or not, you will get your fair share of the national cake, as we like to call it.
All right.
That is the brilliance of this Katiba. And that is why we must defend it to the core. And part of defending it is insisting that government appointments must reflect the face of the nation. The president must look for people from across this country who believe in his wheelbarrow, because he will find them. He will go to Kisumu, he will find people who believe in the wheelbarrow.
Emanyuria as well.
Emanyuria, he will find people who believe in that wheelbarrow.
Okay.
They must represent the face of the nation.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that, Jim India. Sorry to cut you short. Briefly, 1 minute, Daktari.
For me, that my part in short will be, let's talk about the issues. Let those be the focus of the conversations that we're having. The chicanery, the politics that come around it, those are not helping us. We have a new government, and they have to really, fold their shirts and get down to doing things for this country. The opposition should also, knock off some of these political gimmicks that they're trying to do. We have some serious problems in this country, and we need to come together and fix them. That is the conversation that I want us to have.
Well, I hope we had that conversation.
We did.
Okay. Asante. Dr. Gashui Karaoke, it's a pleasure to have you with us, as well as Jim India. It's a pleasure. Thank you for your input. Dr. Barak Muluka, it's always a pleasure having you with us. Asante for your time. And that's how we wrap today's edition of Morning Prime. Thank you so much for watching as you usher in the